In the well-manicured neighborhood of Evergreen Grove, where the lawns were the epitome of suburban perfection, and every house followed the strict guidelines of the Homeowners Association, HOA, tensions simmered beneath the idyllic facade. The once close-knit community was gradually fracturing, especially between the residents of color and the ruling white majority. Among these residents was Jamal, a hard-working father and husband, who had recently moved in with his family, dreaming of a life of tranquility and joy, complete with a pool where his children could play during the hot summer month. However, life in Evergreen Grove wasn't the paradise Jamal had anticipated. After spending his savings to install a modest above-ground pool, he received a notice from the HOA. The letter, filled with legal jargon and ominous threats, stated that his pool was in violation of HOA guidelines, which did not specify size or type, but seemed to discourage any deviations from the status quo. This accusation was made at the behest of Karen, a well-known and wealthy resident whose sense of superiority was matched only by her inclination to enforce the neighborhood's unwritten social rules. Karen, an overbearing presence with a penchant for stirring trouble, had taken it upon herself to keep the neighborhood in line. She prided herself on being the gatekeeper of propriety and decorum, often wielding the HOA's regulations like a weapon. When she had spotted Jamal's pool from her gilded perch, it became a focal point in her relentless pursuit of control. That summer, she escalated her campaign against Jamal. With every complaint filed and every meeting convened, the power dynamics of Evergreen Grove shifted ever so slightly, revealing the underlying currents of prejudice that lay buried beneath its surface. This confrontation struck a chord within Jamal, who was already aware of the subtle racism that often overshadowed his experiences in predominantly white spaces. He was determined not to let the HOA's enforcement ruin his family's summer. With pride and resilience fueling him, Jamal and his wife, Lena, began brainstorming ways to push back against Karen's increasingly aggressive tactic. Jamal's initial response to the HOA's letter was to comply, but that lasted only a few days. He realized that conforming would send the message that Karen's bullying behavior was acceptable. Equipped with a potent mixture of anger and determination, Jamal decided it was time to take a stand, not just for himself, but for his children and other families who felt marginalized within the community. He reached out to other residents in Evergreen Grove, hoping to gather support. To his surprise, he found several families, some of whom were also people of color, who had faced similar scrutiny from the HOA. They shared stories of how they had been hassled for trivial things, from the color of their home exteriors to the type of decorations they displayed during holidays. This realization sparked an idea in Jamal's mind. Why not build a backyard water park? It would not only defy Karen's oppressive regime but also celebrate community, fun, and togetherness. Jamal enlisted the help of his neighbors, many of whom were more than willing to contribute. They pooled their resources and began construction on an elaborate setup filled with slides, fountains, and a splash area for children. As the project progressed, the environmental impact showed. What began as a simple plan fleetingly turned into a vibrant display of cultural expression. The colorful tiles, different themes, and activities reflected the diversity of the community. Families nearby were invited to help with the builds, further strengthening bonds and creating a sense of unity against the HOA's oppressive atmosphere. As an unexpected side effect of their joint venture, an informal community gathering began to flourish. The sound of laughter filled the air, music played, and children splashed in the water, a stark contrast to the silence that often enveloped the neighborhood. The local energy shifted. What began as neighbors fighting against discrimination transformed into a community coming together in defiance of mainstream norms. While the water park was taking shape, Karen watched from her mansion-like home, seething with rage and disbelief. She began issuing warnings to the homeowners, trying to scare them into compliance. She doubled down on her mission, claiming the project would lower property values and ruin the neighborhood's reputation. Little did she know that her vitriol would only further galvanize residents. Families began rallying around Jamal and his project, leading to more visible unity and support. Karen's fear of losing control heightened, and she became increasingly desperate to put a stop to the water park before it officially opened. After weeks of teamwork, dedication, and late-night discussions over barbecue, Jamal and his neighbors finally completed the backyard water park. They transformed what was once a simple plot of land into a sprawling oasis filled with color, life, and joy that encapsulated the spirit of community. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday, with invitations sent to all residents of Evergreen Grove, regardless of their HOA standing. Jamal wanted everyone to experience the warmth and love that had gone into creating this safe haven. As the day approached, excitement bubbled in the air. Parents and children prepared to gather, lean into the laughter and fun, and maybe take a stand against the colorless rules that had governed them for too long. Jamal set everything up meticulously, from the signage that read "Welcome to Evergreen Oasis," to the small details like colorful lounge chairs and festive lights strung around the water park, creating an atmosphere that invited joy and camaraderie. On the day of the grand opening, families began to arrive, regardless of what Karen would have preferred. The line of cars winding down the street proved that the neighborhood was tired of the conformity that had stifled them for far too long. Jamal welcomed everyone with open arms, grateful for the support that had transformed his vision into a glorious reality. The sound of children splashing in the water mixed with the laughter of adults, and for the first time in a long time, the air felt alive with possibilities. As the sun dipped low in the sky, giving way to a magic hour, the mood turned festive. People mingled, sharing stories, laughter, and even food. However, unbeknownst to them, Karen was not idle. Furious and feeling her power slipping away, she devised a plan to sabotage the celebrations. She made a frantic call to the police, fabricating tales of noise complaints and safety hazard. Her hope was to have the festivities shut down early, yet the sheer number of people celebrating together challenged her narrative. As the police arrived, Jamal stood tall, ready to defend what they had created. The officer, noticing the overwhelming joy of the event, decided to leave without taking action, stating no laws were being broken. As Karen watched the scene unfold from her window, unable to bear witness to the happiness of her neighbors, the frustration bubbled over, culminating in a fit of rage. She was losing the control she believed was rightfully hers, and in her eyes, Jamal was the embodiment of everything she despised. Her scheming had backfired, ultimately leading to a greater cohesion among residents who had previously felt isolated and afraid. The joy of the grand opening reverberated throughout Evergreen Grove, yet the undercurrent of animosity between Jamal and Karen grew. With the waterpark's success, Jamal became a focal point of both admiration and jealousy within the community. For Karen, envy morphed into a burning need to reclaim her dominance and dismantle what she saw as a threat to her way of life. She could no longer sit idly by, she needed to act. In retaliation, Karen began a campaign against Jamal, going door to door and spreading malicious rumors regarding the legality of the water park. She portrayed it as a hazard to safety, leveraging her standing within the HOA to bring the project into question. "Do you want this ruckus in your backyard?" she would ask neighbors, sowing seeds of discord among those who had been supportive of Jamal. By portraying him as an outsider undermining the community's integrity, she hoped to isolate him and turn the tide in her favor. Jamal was alerted to Karen's actions as expressions of discontent surfaced within the community. Some neighbors began to hesitate, questioning their allegiance, while others expressed concern about HOA repercussions. However, Jamal was undeterred. He believed in the strength of community and was determined to not only defend his project but also educate his neighbors about the underlying issues at play. He organized a community meeting, encouraging everyone to voice their feelings, experiences, and grievances. In an atmosphere filled with apprehension and tension, Jamal utilized his skilled communication to evoke unity rather than division. He spoke passionately about the importance of standing up against oppressive forces and encouraged others to share their stories of discrimination and bullying at the hands of the HOA. One by one, residents began to connect their experiences, unveiling the systemic racism that had crept into the fabric of Evergreen Grove. As voices grew stronger, Karen's influence waned. The more Jamal spoke, the more they rallied as a community. The meeting illuminated the discriminatory practices underlying the HOA's regulations, prompting residents to reconsider their compliance with rules that often felt aimed at stifling diversity. They realized they had the power to collectively enforce change, turning the focus from their fear of Karen to their desire for a vibrant, inclusive community. The shift was palpable, and although it might have been too early for jubilant celebrations, the seeds of resistance were firmly planted. The growing unity among residents fortified Jamal's resolve. He proposed forming a community committee to address issues stemming from the HOA, putting pressure on them to adopt fairer rules. The camaraderie and sense of purpose began to challenge Karen's stronghold over the neighborhood. She found herself increasingly isolated as the momentum shifted. With the community now more cohesive and empowered than ever, the tide began to turn against Karen. Fueled by Jamal's fiery rhetoric and the revelations shared at the community meeting, residents were more willing to speak out against her abrasive tactics. The emotional scars caused by her authoritarian reach were being replaced with a newfound resilience and a determination to rise above the prejudice of the past. Karen's desperation peaked when she learned about the community committee Jamal had proposed. Feeling cornered and unable to accept defeat, she resorted to more drastic measures. She redoubled her efforts to enforce the HOA's rules and even began to file frivolous complaints against Jamal and his neighbors. The complaints ranged from noise disturbances to ridiculous claims about safety violations. Rather than sowing fear, however, her actions only further galvanized the community. The neighbors stood together against Karen's intimidation, echoing Jamal's unyielding belief in the power of unity. As tensions heightened, the tipping point arrived when the HOA convened a meeting to discuss the growing dissent among the community. Jamal and other committee members prepared their case, outlining the pattern of discrimination that had plagued Evergreen Grove for far too long. It was time to take a stand and challenge Karen directly. The meeting room filled with a palpable energy, with residents packing the space in solidarity. When it was Jamal's time to speak, he took a deep breath and focused on his message. This isn't just about a pool or a water park. It's about our right to live freely, our right to be accepted, our right to be who we are. We must not allow anyone, any Karen, to dictate our lives based on fear and bigotry. His words resonated deeply, shifting hearts and minds in that room. Community members began to echo his sentiments, sharing their experiences and voicing their support for the new direction they wanted to see in Evergreen Grove. Even some longtime supporters of Karen began to look at her actions with critical eyes, questioning the implications of her divisive approach. But Karen refused to accept defeat gracefully. During her turn to speak, she brought her complaints front and center. As she attempted to paint herself as the victim, her dismissive and condescending tone only alienated her further from the room. It became increasingly apparent that her shield of privilege was crumbling as she attempted to vilify Jamal and dismiss the experiences voiced by his supporters. At that moment, the community made a collective decision, fueled by hope and courage. They called for a vote to overhaul the HOA's policies. Jamal was ready, advocating for a more inclusive and equitable future for Evergreen Grove, knowing they could accomplish what had previously felt unthinkable. Elation saturated the air as the residents of Evergreen Grove voted overwhelmingly in favor of change. The HOA's outdated regulations fell by the wayside, replaced by a more inclusive set of standards designed to foster a sense of belonging among all residents. The outcome marked the genesis of an era adorned with diversity and camaraderie rather than segregation and power struggles. However, the victory was bittersweet as Karen, feeling betrayed by her community, resorted to a last-ditch effort. Fueled by her rage, she attempted to file multiple complaints against Jamal and the newly formed community committee, but ironically, her own actions raised red flags. Her attempts to drown others in disputes showcased her inability to accept the changing tides, spilling into a saga filled with frivolity, until she herself became the subject of scrutiny and speculation. At the next HOA meeting, residents were compelled to confront Karen, now relegated to the shadows of her former self. They called on her to account for her divisive actions, actively choosing to turn their back on her perceived authority. The power dynamic had shifted. Jamal and the committee stood steadfast, demanding accountability for past behaviors that had hurt and divided the community. It was a cathartic experience for many residents who had felt silenced for too long. Ironically, during this confrontation, the very power structure she'd wielded to intimidate others turned against her, with several neighbors sharing their experiences of unwarranted harassment. As Karen's past came to haunt her, the community stood united, asserting their right to live without fear and emphasizing the importance of accountability and inclusivity. The tipping point arrived when the attorney representing the HOA revealed that Karen had misused HOA funds in her attempts to control and manipulate the community. Onlookers gasped as the details unfolded, and Karen's facade of superiority shattered. Now in the crosshairs of potential legal repercussions for her actions, Karen was unsettled, and the law took its course. The eventual arrest served as a reminder that those who sow seeds of division would ultimately reap what they have sown. In the aftermath, Jamal and his neighbors transformed their project into a community space, preserving the memory of their struggle while ensuring that everyone felt welcome. The once quiet suburban enclave blossomed into a vibrant hub of acceptance and culture, embodying the spirit of unity they had fought to protect. Families now congregated at the Waterpark, their laughter rippling through the air and showcasing the kaleidoscope of life that made Evergreen Grove shine. As Jamal looked over the Waterpark, filled with children and families enjoying their newfound freedom, he couldn't help but feel a wave of hope wash over him. The community had chosen connection over division, showcasing that the fight for justice ultimately fostered unity. The saga that began with fear and hostility culminated in laughter, resilience, and unstoppable growth. And in the battle against prejudice, the residents of Evergreen Grove triumphed, proving that together, they could build a brighter, more inclusive future for all.